I had sworn to myself that I would not tell anyone about what I experienced, but after finding all of you here, I feel that I can tell this story without everyone thinking I was drunk or high. I've been both, and my brain has never created something as scary as this. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia. It's a bit north of Vancouver. I actually work in Vancouver as a programmer for a big tech firm there. I'm not gonna say who because I don't want this to get back to them. I already have a reputation for being unsteady thanks to some bad choices early in my life. I had finished a rather arduous project that took not only my entire team but for myself months to complete so that it became on schedule. We're talking 80-hour work weeks and on the verge of burnout for most of it. My boss had made it clear that when the project was over, I was to take 2 weeks and go home. When I had set out on a Friday morning, the sun had already started its descent and I knew that I wouldn't get home until real late at night. It did not matter since my mom and dad were going to let me crash with them. My family has always been supportive of my rehabilitated life and career. They'd do anything to make sure that I succeeded. Honestly, I don't want to beat around the bush and tell you about my life. There is probably a subreddit for that. What I wanted to tell you about was the hitchhiker that I picked up on the road. I was 4 hours into a 7-hour drive up Interstate 99 and had just passed a sign marker for Tunnel Point when I saw her. If you don't know this area of Canada, Interstate 99 leaves Vancouver and winds its way along the coast of Horseshoe Bay. The entire winding road has the water out my left-hand window with the hills and thick northern forest to my right. When it comes to traffic, it's usually feast or famine. Right now, the two-lane highway was empty, and only blackness hugged the beams of my headlight. A bit of rain fell from the sky, pelting my window, but not enough to make me want to turn on my wipers. I was so tired that I worried that if I took my eyes off of the road, I would fall asleep. That's when I saw her. Well, I think it was her, 'cause it looked like a woman. She was on the far right side of the road. I could make out the movement of her skirt as she semi-walked and stumbled on the unpaved side of the road. Immediately I was worried because I had not seen a car broken down on my journey, and the way she was moving made me wonder if she had been hurt. The closest place was Tunnel Point that I had passed that a while ago. I glanced at my radio clock and saw the yellow numbers for midnight. Maybe it was the exhaustion, but my concern won out. Slowing my beat-up Honda, I glanced in my rearview mirror to make sure nobody was coming, and paced with the stumbling girl. What I could make out of the woman was that she had long hair and her clothes were tattered. Since being closer, I noted she swayed as if she was drunk. I rolled down my window and crinkled my nose at the smell of dead leaves coming from the forest nearby. The earthy scent clawing at my nose. God, I hated the forest. Hey, I called to her, trying to be friendly and not scary. I did not want her to think I was some sort of pervert that was going to have my way with her if she got into my car. I truly was worried for her safety. The girl stumbled a bit more but seemed to stop walking, head still facing down at the ground, matted hair stringy and wet. Poor thing looked like she might have drug herself out of water. Hey, you need a lift somewhere? The girl did not respond. She just stood there looking at the ground as if mesmerized by the stones. I could not make out much except her skin was pale. You okay? I tried again, deciding that if she did not respond this time, I was absolved of my good Samaritan duties. Finally giving up, I began to roll up the window when she reached up and placed her hand on the moving glass. I quickly stopped before getting her hand crushed. I want to go home. Her words came in a mixture of wet coughing. Where's home? I asked. All she did was raise her hand and point forward. I noticed her hands were stained with soil and her nails, once painted, were cracked. Get in. I'll take you home. I said, ignoring the clawing feeling in my stomach. Since stopping the car, I had found myself looking about as if something was trying to sneak up on me. Of course, nothing was there. The hairs on my arms had begun to tingle, and the urge to get out of there overwhelmed me. The girl fumbled with the door a few times before she was finally able to open it. The door creaked agonizingly slow as she pulled it open. Finally, she pulled her tattered form into the car and sat in the seat. I finally got a good look at her, and my heart sunk. She was a petite girl. I would not call her beautiful, but she had a nice face and a decent figure. She wore a white shirt stained mostly brown and green for both mud and grass. The smell of rotting vegetation had followed her into the car. Her brown hair was long but tangled into thick, crazy knots filled with bramble, weeds, and mud. I could barely make out her eyes, but they were brown and vacant. Thin lines of grass stain streaked across her face, with red welts around them, almost as if someone had struck her in the face with a bush. There were scars on her hands, arms, and parts of her legs I could see through the torn skirts. I should have kicked her out. I should have never picked her up. At that moment, I knew that, but it was already too late. How could I kick out someone who obviously looked like they were in trouble? "Where would you like to go?" I asked, searching her clothing, and saw it. A flimsy red plastic name tag where the name was almost faded out. "Bethany? Where would you like to go, Bethany?" "Home," was all she coughed out. I saw a bit of dirt and saliva fall into her lap, then quickly looked ahead and started the car moving again. For the next 10 minutes, I drove, trying my hardest not to look at the corpse-like woman sitting beside me. Like a fool. I did try a bit of small talk to get some more information out of her, but she did not respond. I was thinking so much about what I was doing, and how I got myself into this situation. I actually forgot that she was in the car beside me. The things that a lack of sleep will make you do. It was when I felt her wet hands on my shoulder, soaking through my blue button-up as if she was underwater. I jumped and spun to look at her. Those eyes were focused on me. They were brown like I had surmised, but I could have sworn they were glassy and empty like a fake eye. Either mud or blood had streaked down out of her nostril, and she had a tight grip on my shoulder. "Up there," she coughed out, and I saw this Bethany was pointing out the window. I saw it. It was a dirt road turning off the main highway into the forest. I did tell you I hated the forest. I did not want to turn. I tried to say something about dropping her off, but the vice-like grip on my shoulder had begun to ache. "Take me home," she gurgled again. It was at this point that I began to think to myself that what I was dealing with might not actually be human. Slowing my vehicle and turning onto the dirt road, I was glad that I was buckled as the car rocked back and forth on a road that had not been maintained in years. The forest around felt claustrophobic, as the smell of wet leaves and decay permeated my car. I wanted to roll down the window, but my panicking brain told me that something would get in if I did. Even the moon struggled to push through the canopy of foliage overhead. I realized that I had entered a clearing when the roof erupted in a thunderous sound. It took me a split second to realize that it had begun to rain heavily. The moon was now in full force, illuminating the path ahead. My heart dropped as I saw it. We were in the middle of nowhere in the Canadian wilderness, and standing in the middle of this field were 5 massive stone pillars reaching up towards the heavens. They had to be at least 3 stories, having a thick base that tapered smaller towards the top. This place was not centered in the clearing, but the last few pillars were placed against an ancient-looking forest that felt older than it should have been. As my car reached the end of the dirt road, and for a brief moment I thought I would be out of here, my car died. It didn't sputter, it didn't choke, it just turned off. It rolled a few feet to a stop, perfectly at the end of the road. The thing with the name tag, Bethany, fumbled for the door a few times before successfully opening it. She fell out onto all 4 before slowly and painfully pulling herself up. I was doing my hardest not to panic, but I could feel the tightness in my chest and the suffocating stench clawing at my lungs. I did not want to leave that car, but the smell would have killed me if I didn't. Throwing open the door and falling out myself, I breathed in the clean, wet air and ignored the rain pelting me. Pulling myself up by the warm hood of my car, I decided to look around and found that Bethany had meandered like a zombie into the middle of these tall pillars. It did not appear she had any rhythm or reason to be in there. She just stood there, shoulders slumped, looking ahead in the dark forest and the last two pillars. Now this is the part where I was stupid. I could have just abandoned my car and made a run for it, but curiosity got the best of me. You know that feeling where you think you are safe because nothing is paying attention to you? Yeah, well, I fell for that trap. I crept forward to keep a low profile, looking between the closest pillar and Bethany, who still had not moved. I closed the distance pretty easily and crouched behind the rough-hewn stone. I glanced down and noticed strange carvings that looked almost like symbols. When I looked back up, Bethany was no longer alone. Standing in the grove with her were about 6 new people, all women, and they looked in the same state as the girl I had brought here. They had formed a semicircle with Bethany at the front of it. It was at that point I realized that they were also not alone. I could not make them out, and I thank God every day, but a group of things had appeared between the pillars. They were unnatural, standing at least 7 feet tall with arms that were stretched down to the ground, their arms jointed in unnatural ways. They seemed to be wearing heavy sailors' outfits, but it was torn and decaying. Their faces were covered in cloth, but I had a sense that whatever was underneath was moving about. I stifled a scream and covered my mouth when I looked to my right and saw the clawed foot of one of those things by me. That foot. God. It had 6 toes, but these were not any ordinary toes. They were made out of human fingers. I wanted to run away so bad, but I knew that it would see me, so I stayed hunched down, looking at the gathering. It was then I noticed they had something new. I did not see how it happened, but now in the clearing were a man and a woman. They were not like the others, but struggling against bindings that had their hands tied behind their backs. The rain was still coming down, but the moon illuminated the absolute terror in their faces. Both of them were naked, their legs and feet stained by the mud and grass from around. They had been forced to their knees facing the forest. I felt something tremor through the ground and both became still, mostly in abject terror as I had done. A pressure began to build up in my head as if something was trying to escape, and I clasped at it still, unable to pull my eyes away from what I was watching. Something in the forest was speaking. I don't know how I knew, but the language was ancient, forbidden, words that defied understanding, but I could somehow instinctively understand that it was saying at the same time. Now the words have failed like a bad dream, but I had the foresight to write it down at the end, as you'll find out. Here's what it felt like it was being said. Who comes to the ancient door to the chaos cold? We, the servants of Dyack. The woman, including Bethany, chanted back in the same tongue. Do the blessed seek favor or vice? The rumbling said again. We seek nothing but the glory of Dyack, came the response. Only through turning of time, of no sun shall the glory be attained. Death to the light and those who support it, O Deck. Bring the feast for those who collect loyalty, the thing intoned. What I saw next was something that I can only describe, but still does not do it any justice. The ground seemed to be alive as roots of a tree burst from the ground and snaked their way to the naked man, who began to scream. His screams were muffled, as it seemed dirt was packed tightly into his mouth. The roots snaked up his body, fastening themselves tightly on his limbs. I didn't know what was going on until his screaming got louder, and the sound of cracking and tearing echoed through the chamber. as if like a paper doll. The man's limbs were slowly pulled one by one from his torso and were flung into the darkness where those tall creatures waited, greedily snapping up, and from the sound, I could only guess were feeding. The man was still alive and had gone into shock as the vines carried the remains into the dark forest from which the sound was coming. When the blood-stained vines returned, they were empty. The woman had stopped screaming and had been silently weeping. I could only guess she had given up knowing what her fate was going to be. As I would find out, if her fate was the same as the man's, it would have been a mercy. The vines had returned and began to wrap them around her feet and arm, slowly raising her above the ground like the man and holding her over the unholy congregation. The voice thrummed again through the landscape. The epoch of night will return. Dyak. The time of decay will find the land once more. And then the end came for the naked girl. I'm not going to describe it because you all don't need to have the same memory in your head, but all I'm going to say is that the branches sought out every orifice and forced their way into her body. Her eyes proved to be the most resistant, but from the sounds and what I could see, she had been impaled like some grotesque puppet wailing from the dirt. Holes were pierced as everything in the way was moved, and her blood began to trickle down on the woman who had turned their head upwards. The last thing I saw before the pressure knocked me out was many vines exiting their upturned mouths, reaching to the sky and the feast above, and something massive in the forest beginning to lift up. When I reawoke, my first thought was that I was next on the menu, but the bright sun beat down on me, and my car idled quietly on the path. Instead of stone pillars, I was at the base of a large tree. They were in the same position, but it did not look like the scene from earlier. I dragged my soaked body to the car and somehow made it to my parents. They were shocked to see me in the condition I was in, but did not tell them anything. I slept for 3 days, and they had called a doctor. I had nightmares of the voice, and when I woke, I found that I had written the conversation of that horrific night in one of my comic books from my childhood. It's been about a week now, and I still have not gone back to Vancouver. It's not that I don't want to work there, but that stretch of road now terrifies me. I worry that if I go down that path again, I would be the next meal for whatever is living in the Canadian forest. So, that's it. I got nothing else to say. I'm going to post this and hopefully get back to work tomorrow. My dad is going to drive me back to my apartment. Then, I won't be visiting for quite a long time.
What's the most X-Files-like experience you've had in real life? Let me preface this with my morning routine. Wake up at 4:30 a.m. Out the door by 5:15 a.m. Clock in at work 5:5 XM. Never fails unless major traffic incident on the highway. Anyhow, one morning this past August, I am out the door as usual, minimal traffic on the road. Boss calls halfway through my commute. "Hey, you coming in?" And I say, "Yeah, why do you ask?" "Boss, well it's 6:30 a.m. and you usually call if you're going to be late." I look at my dashboard and yup. It's 6:30 a.m. Somewhere between leaving my door and getting on the road I lost about 1 hour. In high school, my pal bounced a bouncy ball in his room so hard, that we never saw it again. We tore that room up, never found it. My cousin and I both remember a room that apparently doesn't exist. When we were both around 10, my cousin was having family problems, and my mom invited her to stay with us while it got sorted out. It was pretty fun, kind of like having a temporary sister. We ended up talking about it a few years ago, reminiscing about the weird things we would do together and some of the memories that stood out the most, among them the night we stayed up laughing at my golden retriever, who kept trying to steal my pillow off the bottom bunk when we were trying to get to sleep. Only problem was, we didn't have a dog, and I never had a bunk bed. For whatever reason, I'd never considered how little sense the memory made. Thinking maybe she was just going along with the story, I asked her what color the bed frame was. She thought about it for a second and then answered red. She was right. According to my mom, we never stayed over at anyone else's house, and even if we had, I still remember what her friends' houses looked like. None of them had red bunk beds. I still have no idea what happened. I have a friend who once told me about a time when he was in his teens. He slept in a bunk bed with his brother in the lower bunk. He said he dreamt a demon wearing the skin of a man threatened to kill his brother. In order to save him, he somehow managed to procure a knife and put the knife to the neck of the demon. The demon tells him, "The only way to rid evil is through evil." He hesitated and woke up to find he was pressing a butcher knife under the neck of his younger brother. He was still sleeping, fortunately, but when he awoke, he told the same dream exactly, except he was attacked by his brother in the dream and said the exact same thing: the only way to rid evil is through evil. Nothing similar happened after that, and it gave him some serious issues that led him to go through psychotherapy for a while. I can't say if it's true or not. As far as I know, he made the whole thing up, but I don't think so, as he was reluctant to mention it. Ghost car. I worked the overnight shift at an AM radio station back in the 90s. Saw a car come down the driveway to the parking lot. Went out to see who it was and the car was just gone. I would have seen if it had turned around or backed out. Thought I was going nuts until the announcer strolled out of the studio and said, "What happened to that car?" I was 6 and my brother was 10. We had a 21-year-old foster brother who lived with us off and on. One night I woke up to see him standing in the doorway of my room, checking on me. I said his name in a questioning voice. He said, "It's okay. Go back to sleep." Around the same time, my brother woke up in tears. He said he'd had a dream about a knight standing on a hill, and it made him feel very sad. Turns out our brother died in a car crash that evening. When I was 19 and my best friend was 20, we are nearly 40 now, we were driving back to my house after visiting someone at work. We were on a somewhat busy road. It was getting dark but wasn't quite dark yet. There were street lights and business lights everywhere, so visibility was still great. This road was 3 lanes in each direction and there was a concrete median dividing the traffic. I was in the left lane next to the median, and a traffic light was coming up. I saw a man standing in the median a good way before where the crosswalk for the light would be. It instantly made me nervous. As soon as I thought that, he stepped out to cross the street. My best friend and I both instantly braced for impact as I slammed on my brakes. We went through him. We didn't hit him, and because there was a car to my right, I wasn't able to swerve out of my lane to avoid hitting the man. I looked in my rear view and there wasn't anyone there. I had come to a complete stop and we physically turned around in our seats to see how he had jumped out of the way. There was no one there and no way he could have ran off or hidden anywhere that fast. We both turned toward to each other and almost in sync asked each other, "Did you see that man?" We both saw the same thing. A man, couldn't describe his face, but it was a man's form, and both of us remember being confused as to why he was wearing a white robe, and both being terrified that he stepped out in front of us, like he was committing suicide. I had a baby in the back seat. She was about 3 months old. She had been crying during the drive and went silent when we came to a screeching stop, which added to the weirdness of it all. We still bring it up occasionally and neither of us can come up with an explanation for what we saw other than something supernatural. Also, we both saw the white cloth fling across the windshield, like he was hitting it. But there was no impact, nothing. It was like he went through the car. 6 years ago, I was hanging out with my siblings in our yard during a clear, sunny day around high noon, and I suddenly caught something moving in the sky out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to get a better look, I couldn't reconcile what the hell I was seeing. It was a metal cube just gliding through the air pretty high up. I proceeded to absolutely lose my mind and my sib saw it as well before it disappeared behind some trees. We ran to the other side of the trees but it was already gone. Still creeps me out to think about. We did live right next to a military base, so make of that what you will. Thing had all the aerodynamics of a literal brick though. I stole a picture from one of the historic houses in Old Town San Diego on Halloween for fun with my girlfriend. Picture was painted in the 1800s. It was Jesus praying in a hallway, Upon closer examination there was an alternate black devil-looking Jesus hidden in the shadows of the painting. Took it home and put it in the closet. Randomly on nights I would smell the worst smell in the world and wake up and see what looked like a black smoke cloud. I moved 3 times and still saw the same crap. Finally my roommate saw the same thing, so I knew I wasn't crazy. Long story short, I brought the picture back to where I got it and told one of the employees what I did and apologized, and she replied, "Don't worry, they always come back to us." My wife calling my name, nothing unusual about that, except that I did not hear it with my ears, as I was listening to Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying on the stereo, and it was cranked up. I heard it in my mind. I walked to the bathroom as I knew my wife was taking a bath. I found her face down in the water. She was unconscious, having suffered an epileptic seizure. Fortunately, I found her in time. I saw my mom holding my baby sister in her arms and taking her to bed. Not weird, right? My mom was still pregnant with my sister at that time. I went to kitchen and saw her still in there. Still pregnant. I didn't even bother going to bedroom to see who just went in there. Just nope. Stay in living room and mind my own business. Oh okay. This one scarred me for a couple of months. When I was in high school, a guy and I got into an argument. He socked me in the jaw, and started to fall to the floor. When I hit the floor, I instantly transported to a dinner table at which I was an adult. There was a woman sitting across from me, with a toddler boy and a preteen girl. I got a good look of my surroundings, a relatively modern house with what looked like 2 floors. I felt like I belonged here, like I had some sort of emotional connection with all the people in the room, especially the kids. Then the woman, my wife, asked me a question. When I opened my mouth, I threw up all over the table and woke up in a stretcher in an ambulance. Hours later, I found out I just had a minor concussion. For a while, I felt like I left a part of my life behind. Even if it was only for a bleak moment in that world. To this day, I can still clearly remember all their faces and what the house looked like. Lost time. My brother was helping me across the country. We borrowed a van and loaded everything up for the last trip. Just before we left I checked my watch and called my girlfriend that we would be hitting the road soon. My brother checked the kitchen clock but only told me later he did. We set out but couldn't do more than 80 kilometers per hour because of the load. When we took the off-ramp of my new city, my brother told me he couldn't remember the trip. When I thought about it, neither could I. We both thought we were tired and thought nothing of it. However, when we arrived at my new house my girlfriend asked if I broke the speed limit because we were almost an hour early. When retracing the route, my brother and I both agreed that we can remember passing a certain gas station and nothing thereafter, until the off-ramp. To this day we have no clue what happened during that hour we're missing, or how we could have traveled that fast. Not with any car or van at least. Now at the beginning I wrote we both independently checked for time. This is important for us because one time source could have been wrong but not both. Also, I called before we left which limits the time we could use to travel. Since then, we have never experienced any weirdness like it or otherwise. I don't have any weird memories or dreams, no pieces of metal lodged under my skin etc. Just an hour I lost. I once had a dream of this girl I was friends with. She came to me in a dark room and asked me to protect her. I wrapped my arms around her and was warped over top of her in a car she was sleeping. The street lights kept flashing upon her face and everything started spinning, and all I could hear was screaming, until bam, and I woke up covered in scratches, blinding headache, could barely get out of bed, my back and ribs hurt so bad I could hardly breath, had a mouth full of blood. I got online and messaged her every single detail. 2 days later she messaged back telling me that's the creepiest effing thing she's ever read and couldn't believe it. She was on a car trip to North Carolina with a friend and he fell asleep at the wheel, and the car rolled into the woods and hit a tree. He spent 6 months in the hospital. She was only there for a week. She's only like 4'11", 120 pounds. It's a miracle she wasn't hurt worse. When I was 12 I spent the night at a friend's house. We were up late chatting, falling asleep listening to some music, Hotel California, and suddenly the music stopped. A bright blue light shined into the bedroom window, lit the room up then dissipated. Hotel California resumed like nothing happened. We were frozen, dumbfounded and freaked out, getting lots of chills and feeling weird. Did you see that? I reluctantly got out of bed to peek outside, nothing there but an empty parking lot by a wooded area. I looked at the clock. It said 2:14. For the next couple years it became somewhat of an urban legend among my friends. We'd stay up until 2:14 at each other's house and dare something to happen like that again. Lots of fun scaring ourselves, but nothing happened. It just became known as 2 to 14 and we'd joke about it whenever we saw that it was 2:14. 2 years later I was at a different friend's house, up late watching movies in the living room, Hot Dog the movie. It was over and we shut off the TV and were just chatting like normal, falling asleep. Suddenly a bright white light shined into the living room window, lighting up the place, then dissipating just like the blue light from 2 years before. I immediately was struck with fear. "Did you see that?" My friend replied, "Yeah." I was filled with dread as I turned over to get a view of the VCR to see what time it was, my body covered in chills with anticipation. It was 2:14. My whole body was covered with shivers, my eyes watering, just freaking out. I already knew I didn't need to get up to look out the window, my friend's backyard is just all woods. Nothing could be back there. Suffice to say, with 2 different witnesses to go along with myself, 2:14 was a confirmed real thing in my life and I've been haunted by it ever since. Nothing like it has happened since, but it sure did color my adolescence, and make me intrigued and fascinated by all things paranormal, unexplainable, weird, fantastic, etc. It was no surprise I became a huge X-Files fan. This happened when I was either 8 or 9. It involves a weird incident with my twin brother, and for a long time afterwards I thought I had dreamt it. So, it was early evening after the sun had gone down, and I was downstairs in the living room watching TV. My brother was up in our bedroom reading. At some point this really uncomfortable feeling came over me, and I thought that my brother needed my help. I go upstairs, and our bedroom at the time was at the end of the hallway. As I walk down the hallway, and I'm standing right outside our door, and right as I go to knock, I hear a voice say, "I have to leave now." He opened the door, said. I think someone was outside the window talking to me, but the only thing I heard was that they had to leave. We were both creeped out, and told our mom what happened, but nothing ever came of it. For a long time, I thought I had dreamt this, but a few years ago my brother asked me, "Hey, remember that time when we were kids and someone was talking to me through the bedroom window? Remember how he left right when you came in the room? What the hell was that?" Because he remembers it exactly the way I do, I'm convinced this really happened. Boy, this still wigs me out. I was driving back from a 16-hour road trip to see family and I was about an hour from home. The whole trip was just 4 days long, so I was pretty sleep deprived and had been driving by myself with very few stops. I was cruising on the highway and in front of me was a tunnel through the mountains. I hadn't driven through a tunnel on the way out of the state, so I became alarmed I had been driving the wrong way. I checked my GPS but had no signal on my phone. Unusual, the whole trip I normally have signal. I immediately took the exit before the tunnel to get my bearings. It was a big circle exit and at the end was a 4-way stop with a flashing traffic light. I took a left and the only thing around was a small 50s style diner and a parking lot. All the lights were off in the diner, obviously closed, but the parking lot was full of cars. Like, packed. There were old classic cars and new cars, but there was not a single soul to be seen. It was around 3 a.m., so I didn't expect a crowd, but there wasn't a hotel or homes nearby. Just a closed diner and parking lot full of cars. I didn't even slow down. I effing noped out of there so hard. Pulled away in the street and drove back to the on-ramp to the highway. Once I was back on the highway, I drove for about 30 minutes until the GPS came back. I was actually pretty close to home. My friend and I once drove back to try and find the diner, but we never could find it, or the tunnel. I like to think that if I would have pulled into the parking lot, my car might have been added to the collection, and no one would have seen me again. Driving to Binghamton, New York many years ago on the highway, coming around a bend, over a hill to my right. A bright gold metallic object falling slowly from the sky a few miles away. It fell like origami over itself and folded and unfolded randomly in multiple places like it was working its way to Earth. This was in the early afternoon. First I thought it was a weather balloon, but it was huge and ridged and very angular, changing shapes as it fell very considerably. Still have no idea